When it comes to speed, the wings, engine, generator, and thruster all play a role, but in different ways. Let's start with the engine. The engine affects your speed while in dragonfly mode, lateral movement, forward and backwards movement, and how fast you climb. Let's look at the numbers. So swapping in wings, generator, or different thrusters or any other parts won't change these base numbers. They are only affected by the engine. The wings affect your glide speed, so when the engine shuts off and you go into vulture mode, each wing upgrade provides about a 10 km/h improvement. But obviously, with a little bit of a downward angle, you can get a slightly higher max speed. This is also independent of engine speed, so swapping different engines won't change the glide speed. A Mark IV engine with Mark VI wings glides at the same speed as a Mark VI engine with Mark VI wings. The thruster can boost both engine speed and glide speed. While in dragonfly mode, it will boost your engine speed, making you climb faster and fly faster horizontally. Each thruster tier upgrade provides an additional boost on top of the engine tier upgrade's improvement speed, so here are some more numbers. And remember, changing the wings or the generators won't change these numbers. Now when we look at the thruster boost for glide, it works slightly different. You don't get very significant increases per tier. When you look at the numbers, those small differences only equate to 2 km/h increase per thruster tier. So what that means is your wings are way more important for speed upgrades than your thruster is. All Mark IV parts, plus a set of Mark VI wings, will have you boost gliding at 208 km/h. In fact, the only benefit to upgrading your thruster is that 2 km/h extra speed, and you get the extra armor too, because the higher tier thruster actually uses more fuel, so the thruster is something that you'll want to think twice about upgrading. The carrier only has one tier, so I'll put those numbers separately here. And also, carrying a buggy doesn't change the times. I was not able to test this with a sandcrawler because I don't have one, but I assume it's the same speed as a buggy, but it might not be. All rockets give a flat reduced rate of speed of -20% for the Scout and -10% for the Assault. These show in the descriptions, and it is straightforward. It's a drop for both engine and wing speed. I won't show you all the numbers again, but just to give you an idea of what that looks like for the fastest Scout, you are going from this to this when you add rockets. This is the fastest any Scout can go with rockets on. For the Assault, it's a -10% loss for both the engine and wings. The thruster does not take an additional 10% loss, so the max speed of an Assault with rockets is this. That boosted glide at 167 is probably the most important number here. An Assault with rockets can chase down or escape any Scout with rockets. It can chase down a Mark IV Scout with storage. Now the generator. The generator doesn't affect speed directly, but it does affect how long you can use your thruster, so it's important to consider when trying to build for speed. The dots on this bar represent your base heat level. This is higher while hovering because your engines are on, and lower while gliding or landed. This base heat level is important because the lower it is, the more time you have to use your thruster or rockets before you overheat. In theory, a better generator should provide a lower base heat level, and in testing, it kind of does. The first time doing this test, you see some logic here. Sometimes the generator is providing a lower base heat, but sometimes, like with the Mark VI engine, it's actually getting worse. Then after retesting, I noticed a lot more inconsistencies. I tried keeping fuel levels and durability similar to make sure that it wasn't something else affecting the numbers, but after all my tests, it was too hard to get any sort of consistency. The biggest tell to why I think it's bugged is because after breaking down an Ornithopter and reassembling it, it gave me different numbers. There is no reason for that unless it is bugged. The generator is still important though. It does affect how fast your heat meter fills up and cooldowns outside of overheating. For this test, I used a Mark IV Thopter and I swapped out each generator and tested it with each thruster. I went into a glide and I boosted up from 30 degrees to the overheat temperature of 150 and then timed it. You see a big jump between the Mark IV generator and the Mark V of that 4 seconds, but something weird happens when you go from the Mark V to the Mark VI. I tested this 3 separate times. The first 2 times, the Mark 6 generator gave me inconsistent numbers, similar to the Mark 5's numbers. The third test, I finally got some consistency between the thrusters, but it still only gave me a 1-second improvement from the Mark 5 generator. This is another reason I think the generators are bugged. It just doesn't make sense to have such a large improvement from 4 to 5, but almost none at all from 5 to 6. Also, when you look at the assault, which was a lot easier to test because numbers seemed way more consistent, there is a clear 5-second difference between the generators. So I can only assume the Mark 6 generator is not giving the increase that it should be. Regardless, you see consistency and a pattern here. Logic says that if a generator is better at heat dissipation, it should in fact make it take longer to heat up. And it definitely does. It probably needs a little buff in that Mark 6 tier, but you can definitely expect an improvement in time to boost for each generator upgrade. The overheat cooldown for all thrusters and all generators is 10 seconds. There are 2 exceptions to this, the carrier and rocket spamming in an assault, which I'll talk about. A better generator does not improve your overheat cooldown times. However, it does appear to improve cooldown times outside of the overheat. This too appears to be bugged though. In this test, I boosted up to 140 and dropped out before overheating. Then I timed how long it took to drop to 50 degrees. I stayed in glide to make sure the higher base from hovering didn't slow the cooldown down. Okay, when you look at the Scout's results, it doesn't appear there is a difference between the generators. First reason I think this is bugged is because of the inconsistency between thrusters. With the Mark 4 generator, each thruster should have the same cooldown time. They all have the same extra heat of 150. There should not be as big of a 3-second difference between the Mark 4 and Mark 6 thruster. If the Mark 6 thruster really was that much better, you would see it in the other examples, but that is not showing. Next reason I think it's bugged is because all the previous testing I've done with the generator, there are other bugs elsewhere with this thing, so it wouldn't be that surprising if this was bugged also. The third reason I think it's bugged is because the Assault shows a clear difference. The Assault overall has been more reliable for data. It seems less bugged overall, so it would make sense if the Assault in this example is in fact giving the accurate information. The fourth reason I think it's bugged is because the generator's main purpose is heat dissipation. If it's better at that at each tier, then each tier should theoretically dissipate heat faster. That's not really happening. The fifth reason I think it's bugged is because there is a noticeable improvement in cooldown with rockets, which I'll talk about in a second. All the data points to these cooldown timers just not working properly. The takeaway? Don't let that stop you though from upgrading your generator. You still get the benefit of boost time increase, you'll still get a benefit of the rocket heat cooldown, and you'll still get the benefit of better cooldown timer in the Assault. And likely this will get adjusted because the logic points to it supposed to be helping with cooldown timers, but even before that, it's still worth an upgrade. The heat generated by rockets is a lot more straightforward than thrusters. It tells you in the description how much heat it produces per rocket, and that lines up. It increases your temperature as shown on your meter by that exact amount. Different generators do not change this number, so unlike the thruster, where better generator means you have more boost time, a better generator does not mean you can fire more rockets before overheating. Now, if the generators were working properly, you should have a lower resting heat number with a better generator. That would indeed mean you can fire more rockets because a lower starting heat means more buildup until overheat. But the actual heat increase per rocket does not change with each generator. The overheat cooldown timer for rockets is not affected by a better generator. All generators have an overheat cooldown of 10 seconds, Scout and Assault for rockets and thrusters. The only difference is when you spam rockets in the Assault. It increases the cooldown time to 13 to 15 seconds. I think this is due to the visual meter having to continue to go up, then pause, then start going down, because when you slowly build heat with rockets, you still get the same 10-second cooldown. So I'm not sure if this is an intended penalty for spamming rockets or it's a small bug. The regular cooldown post-overheat is affected by a better generator, but barely. First, it's important to know cooldown is not linear. It slows way down as you get closer to your base heat level. The first 20 degrees drops significantly faster than the last 20. To test the differences between generators, I timed the cooldowns after it drops out of overheat at a temperature of 100 down to a temperature of 50. The first time I was in hover, which meant I had a higher base temperature, could have affected the numbers, but there is still an improvement in each. The second time doing this test, I stayed in a glide so that the base temperature was lower to make sure that those last 20 to 30 degrees that move really slow don't impact my results. And as you can see, there continues to be improvements for each tier in how fast it reduces temperature. The takeaway: a better generator should give you a lower base temperature, which would allow you to fire more rockets before overheating, but this is bugged. A better generator does not affect how much heat each rocket produces. A better generator does not reduce overheat cooldown times. A better generator does reduce non-overheat cooldown times. I didn't go too deep into fuel testing because fuel is so cheap it's not a big deal if you have fuel inefficient parts, but there are a couple things I want to point out. The chassis holds your fuel and the higher tiers have an increase in the amount it holds. If you look at the amount of fuel that each cell has, you notice how insignificant these increases are. So going from the Mark IV Scout chassis to the Mark VI Scout chassis only gives you half of a small fuel cell's worth of an increase. Wherever you see power consumption, that is referring to fuel usage, not heat. Looking at the engine, each tier upgrade uses more power and therefore more fuel. Each generator upgrade also uses more fuel, as shown by the fuel efficiency that it has. In this test, I compared the Mark IV engine and the Mark VI engine with all three generators. It starts you at 99% as soon as you take off, so I timed how long it took to get down to 74% for a 25% loss. Hovering uses more fuel compared to gliding or idling, so I did this test while hovering. Quick side note, hovering while staying still or hovering while moving uses the exact same amount of fuel. I realized I had points in fuel efficient pilot after doing this, but that won't change what is important here. We are looking at the differences between engine loss and generator loss. We're not trying to understand exactly how many minutes you have until you run out of fuel, because that will vary depending on how you use it and some other parts that you have on it. Firstly, I wanted to see if it's working correctly, and it is. You do lose fuel faster with either an engine upgrade or a generator upgrade. Secondly, I wanted to see which one affects it more. And just looking at the numbers, you see that going from a Mark IV engine to a Mark VI engine has a greater impact on fuel than going from a Mark IV generator to a Mark VI generator. So in other words, upgrading the engine will cause you to lose more fuel than upgrading your generator. The thruster also uses fuel, as indicated by the power consumption levels. Each tier has more power consumption and therefore uses more fuel than the last. I tested the total thrust time it took for each to drop to 95%. Again, this is not meant to show the exact amount of time that you have before running out of fuel, but rather it's a test to show that there is in fact a difference and that it's working properly. Having a different generator or different engine, or even having different pilot fuel perks will affect these numbers. So giving the exact time that you have to use a thruster before running out of fuel felt kind of irrelevant. Upgrading your chassis for fuel is pointless. That doesn't mean it's not worth it. It still has better armor, but if you're doing it strictly for a bigger fuel tank, it's probably not worth it. Upgrading your engine will affect fuel more than upgrading your generator. Each thruster upgrade uses more fuel than the last. Overall, fuel is so cheap and the differences aren't that significant, so you really don't have to worry about building an Ornithopter just for fuel efficiency. It's probably better to focus on speed or defense. And lastly, rockets do not consume fuel. They do not have a listed power consumption, so that does make sense. The Albatross wings are interesting. The description says they have improved speed, but that's hardly true. Let's look at the speed differences. The only speed improvement it gives is for a forward hover. That is only an improvement of 11 kilometers an hour. That doesn't even apply to a boosted forward hover. They are the same. In fact, the Albatross wings have a slower climb speed, 92 compared to 98 with the regular Mark VI. All other speeds are the same. The main benefit of these is stated, less obviously, in the description. They are meant to keep you in the air longer, like the birds of Volterra. To test this, I set my cursor right at that tip of the triangle, maxed my speed, and I timed how much speed and height I lost every 10 seconds. Here are the results. There is in fact a benefit to these. The reason though that I think these are bad, if that is the thumbnail that I used, is because of how gliding works. Those first 60 seconds give barely any benefit, just 6 meters. The real difference comes when you reach lower speeds, like below 100 or after you've been gliding for 60 seconds. Think about when you're gliding though. You are almost never dropping down to 100 unless you were to go AFK. You'll go up and down to maintain your speed, so that means you'll rarely get that full benefit of these. It's already very easy to keep your altitude with the Mark 6 wings. I even tested this pointing slightly lower, but with Mark 6 wings, they can already glide across the map without losing speed at this angle. So in this specific case, there was no difference. On top of that, you add in the downsides. It has lower agility and turn rating. These variations are more subjective. You might not notice them as much. For me personally, as someone who's keen on fast movement, I do notice it quite a bit. But in this case, it's worth getting a feel for it yourself to see how big of a downside it actually is for you personally. To be fair, I did not test the Mark 4 and Mark 5 Albatross wings, mostly because I couldn't get my hands on them. After 2 hours of trying, I just gave up. But I imagine that they are more impactful than the Mark 6. The reason is they have lower speeds. When you keep higher speeds, you stay in the air longer. So the lower starting speed likely means you'll drop out of the air faster, and therefore having the Albatross wings will come into play sooner and be more relevant. That's just an assumption though. But the other thing to consider is your max speed. If there is one Ornithopter part to upgrade first, it's the wings, so that you can get that max glide speed of 180. If you upgrade to the Mark 6 wings, it's going to be really hard to go back to the Mark 4 or even the Mark 5 Albatross wings. So doing this test with only the Mark 6 and Mark 6 Albatross feels justified, because you'll want those regular Mark 6 wings ASAP, and it's going to be really hard to go backwards. The Stormrider boost module produces less extra heat at 125 compared to regular thrusters 150. This allows you to use it for longer periods of time before it overheats. It also says that the cost of overall speed, but let's start with heat generation. I did this test the same as with regular thrusters. I boosted from a glide at 30 degrees up to overheat, and I timed it. So, like with most of these tests, things are a little buggy. The Mark 4, 5, and 6 regular thrusters should not have different boost times with the same generator. But even with that bugginess, you can still clearly see an improvement when upgrading to the Stormrider at each tier. 4 seconds, 2 seconds, 4 seconds. So you can expect an extra 2 to 4 second improvement in boost time as the benefit. If we look to the Steady Assault boost, which is essentially the same thing but for the Assault, it also gives a 4-second improvement. As I've mentioned, the Assault has been more consistent for data. It seems less buggy overall, so that 4-second improvement seems to be what each upgrade is supposed to be giving you. Now let's talk about the apparent downside. The boost glide speed remains the same. The engine speeds remain the same. The only downside in speed that I was able to pick up on is that it appears to have a slower acceleration. All I did was time how long it takes to go from 0 to max speed with thrust. Consistently, I saw the Stormrider take 4 seconds to reach top speed compared to the regular's 2 seconds. The Steady Assault and Steady Carrier boost module works exactly like the Stormrider boost module, except it's for the Assault and the Carrier. You get a reduction in extra heat at 125 compared to 150, and that gives you more boost time. The downside is the same, it has a slower acceleration. So here are some numbers. I did this test the same as previously again, going up from a temperature of 30 to overheat from a glide, and timed how long it took. The Steady Carrier follows the same principle, except its benefits are even greater. This one gives a pretty huge jump in boost time. This one I tested from a higher temperature as well, 70 degrees starting point compared to the 30 degrees starting point in previous examples. The acceleration differences are the same, 2 seconds and 4 seconds for the Steady. The Hummingbird wings are probably the most straightforward of all these unique upgrades. They have an improved turn and agility rating. Unlike the other parts, there does not seem to be any downside, none that I could find. I briefly mentioned this with the Albatross wings, but when it comes to turn and agility, it's a difference that is way more subjective than a lot of the other stuff. It doesn't really benefit anyone to know that you can turn around in 3 seconds compared to 2, for example, or whatever the numbers might be. Getting a feel for the change in turn rating and agility will be more based on your personal preferences. But I can say, as someone who pays close attention to movement because it's really important to me, these might be my favorite upgrade Thopter part of all of them. That small change of 2 for turn rating and 1 for agility in just the Mark 5 Hummingbird wings is noticeable. So these, more than any part, I'd say you're going to want to get a feel for yourself But know that there does not appear to be any downside, so if you do have the resources, these make a lot of sense to get. The ROC carrier wings are supposed to work just like the Albatross wings, but they are actually even worse. I ran the same tests as I did with the Albatross, starting from max speed at 143, and then I set my cursor right at that tip of the triangle, then measured how much I dropped over a set period of time. Since the carrier drops out of the air so much quicker, I also tested this with my cursor pointed right at that horizon line. These are the results of both tests. Alright, it wasn't much longer, about 70 seconds is when I hit the ground after on both of these tests, but the biggest difference from when I did the Albatross test came after that full 90 seconds. So maybe when you have a higher starting point and you get a little bit more time to test, you'll get a larger difference than what you're seeing in this 30 and 60 second intervals. Also, I'll admit my testing here was a little limited. These might just help keep you in the air slightly better in general, in terms of like how it feels, rather than specific numbers. Just like I talk about with turn rating and agility, how it's more about feel rather than just looking at data. Which I didn't mention yet about these. The feel of the turn and agility is extremely slow, so that is another thing to consider with these. Regardless, ever since they made the booster increase speeds in glide, you'll always be able to use that to regain altitude, so that kind of makes these wings feel unnecessary. They are very expensive also, so I'd personally not use them. As always, let me know in the comments what I messed up, what errors I made, so that everybody can be aware. I appreciate you watching. See you in the next one.